being comfortable with not knowing where things are going is going to become more of a test of leadership, and being able to say to your teams, well, I'm not really sure, but you kind of have to navigate a path anyway.
Welcome all back to the Be Continued podcast. We are Jess, Hilton and Ralph Tribe from Be People, and we have the privilege of sitting down today with Jacky Simmonds, who is the Chief People Officer at Experian. And today's episode is going to be focused on whether HR is ready to take the lead in this changing AI-driven landscape and all of the things that encompasses. Jacky, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Jess.
And pleasure. And as an opener, can you maybe just give our listeners a kind of summary of your background and what it is that you do today?
Thank you. I've been in HR more years than I care to say publicly, a very long time. I am currently the Chief People Officer of Experian PLC, which is a data, technology and information services business, but probably well known in the UK for a business that tells you what your credit score is. I've been there 5 years. Prior to that, I was the Chief People Officer of a company called VEON, which is around telecommunications and digital services. And then prior to that, Chief People Officer of EasyJet, and then before that, TUI Travel. And I suppose one of the things that's characterised all of the businesses that I've worked for is that they have had significant digital and technology transformation.
Within different industries as well, which is quite nice to see.
Yeah.
And one question we've been typically using as an opener is kind of looking at the last 5 years and what the biggest HR shifts have been in that time. Can you talk to us a bit about what you've seen in the last 5 years?
Yeah, interestingly, the last 5 years, I suppose, coincided with the start of COVID, and I joined Experian during COVID. I feel that in terms of kind of HR, it's gone through many transformations over the many years that I've been involved in it. And what I felt in the last 5 years is that it put people back at the centre of business, in the sense that employers really started to think about mental health and well-being and mental health. And so that combination of focusing on performance and people well-being came together in a way that I didn't think it had been quite there previously. And I think the pandemic, one of the positive things of the pandemic was that it made people focus on that. I think the other thing is that it was a very uncertain time for business, and no one quite knew how the world of work was going to evolve. And I felt that a lot of HR leaders were able to be front and centre of that, and therefore develop strategies to cope with kind of completely disruptive landscape and different ways of working.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think it's gone then more recently? So like all of the conversation, or a lot of it, is about everything being rolled back from, some of the kind of interesting changes that happened as a result of sort of COVID, whether it be hybrid working, whether it be well-being, whether it be, to a degree, actually inclusion, because obviously you had the George Floyd episode sort of occurred sort of, at a similar sort of time. And then we read in the papers, things are being rolled back, everyone's going back to it. What's your kind of sense of that?
This is my personal view, is that I think that sometimes when what seems to be a new thing comes out, people kind of over-index on it, and kind of maybe just the focus might be out of balance. Personally, I always think that, I've worked places where we've got the balance right. So I don't think you should apologise for kind of doing the right thing. And I wonder if those companies that are dialing back maybe got things out of balance. So there was so much focus on it that maybe there were initiatives that really might not have been the right things to do, or they maybe were at the expense of other things. But I think if you take inclusion, for example, and belonging, if you're doing the right thing for your business, regardless of what the landscape is outside, you'll carry on doing the right thing for your business. And I think probably that's the same with the hybrid working. I don't think 5 years ago any company set out to be fully remote.
Yeah.
And I think probably that's what happened in some organisations. And I don't know whether that reaction about kind of mandating people go back to office was some sort of rebalancing of that.
Yeah.
So that's the way I see things.
Yeah, we had a couple of guests on the podcast a while back when we were talking about leadership and in particular, leadership in a BANI world. So, this thing we've all heard of VUCA, volatile, uncertain, etc. And then BANI, maybe the new version of that is sort of brittle, anxiety-provoking, non-linear, and completely incomprehensible. And it
I haven't heard that before, Ralph, so I'm learning something new.
Absolutely. Well, we learned about it as well. It actually is from a book that came out in 2018, so it's not that new. But certainly some of it feels sort of thematically more intense and more relevant. This thing about the world is becoming, to a degree, incomprehensible. If you think about AI and sort of stuff like that, I mean, we've no idea where it's all going to go. We know it's going to go somewhere, but the whole point with that sort of thing is we don't know exactly where. Anyway, we were talking about this, and we were talking about, what does that mean for leaders and leadership skill and the like in today's world. And Dom and Kathleen, who are our guests on that time, they were saying it's kind of interesting. They saw some of the best examples themselves of brilliant leadership during COVID, because leaders became sort of completely exposed, completely found themselves in a situation that they had not been in before, and had to sort of step up with communicating better, storytelling, and for a while, leaders were doing a great job of coping and doing right by the teams that they led. Do you have any sort of views on that? Did you see good examples of leadership then? Do you think they stuck or?
Yeah, I saw great examples of leadership, and I think they have stuck. But I think that what leaders had to cope with then during that period of time was a lot of ambiguity, because it's not very clear kind of what was going to happen. I don't think anyone could have sort of had the foresight to see what the impact the pandemic would have on kind of ways of working. I thought there were some really great examples where you kind of thought about the human rather than the leader, and you saw that where people's home lives were brought, that blend of kind of life and work kind of came together. So I thought there were some real great examples of humanity, kind of real human-centered leadership that came through. I don't think that's particularly changed in my observation, but what I think has happened is that the requirements and the demands on leaders have got more and more. And I think that, being comfortable with not knowing where things are going is going to become more of a test of leadership, and being able to say to your teams, well, I'm not really sure, but you kind of have to navigate a path anyway through this. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be more and more important. I mean, I've worked in industries in the past, I've got a long past in the travel sector. Well, that was a sector that had so many external things happen to it. As a leader, you were always having to be tested on kind of uncertainty, not knowing, and ambiguity. I think for other industries that may not have experienced that, the pandemic was the first time that really, really happened. And I think with the impact of really fast technological change, the kind of all of the external events that are going on, I think that's just going to become more par for the course, that leaders will be expected to just be able to adapt. And I think that's going to be very hard for some people, because that's not how we have taught leadership, I don't think, in the past.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting what you're both saying, because there is kind of, like you said, Jacky, HR has been at the sort of front and center of a lot of the shifts that have happened in the years, but it's also true, like no one knows exactly how to manage it or what's going to happen. So you're kind of navigating the sort of unknown. And I really like your point on finding the balance, because I made a joke not so long ago about how HR is typically the function of influence, but it seems like there's a lot of trends that people jump on, almost like TikTok or social media influencers, where you just see a trend, everyone jumps on it, and then it's huge, and then there's another trend that crops up and this one just gets left and people move on to the next one. So I feel like, obviously saying yes, knowing the balance is key, but it seems quite a hard task for people to do. So do you have any advice on how you manage to, when you say to find a balance, what does that mean? And how do you think people are losing track of that?
It's quite a difficult question to sort of answer. But the way I think about things is that if I think about my role where I am, there's always lots of noise in the system. There's always new things coming that you ought to think about. But I think you have to think really carefully, what are the external things that are going on that are going to impact how I might attract people, how I might retain them? What are all the things going on that our business is trying to achieve? And then you have to kind of really think about how you prioritise that. I totally agree with what you said. I do see this about fads coming in. And, I talk very openly. I've got a great chief diversity leader who is also my head of talent acquisition. And, 5 years ago, he joined just shortly after me. And we really kind of set out a strategy where we integrate this into everything we do. We don't make it a standalone initiative. So it seems like an initiative. We just think about all of the things that we're doing and how do we make it kind of seamless. And I think that about other things as well. If you have something that's so standalone, it will either distract you completely or it won't work. And so I do think you have to kind of stand back and take all of these inputs and then think about, okay, what is it that we really need to focus on to get this business and to do the right thing for our people.
Yeah.
Going back quickly to something you were saying about leadership in a sort of current environment, which is becoming increasingly an environment where we don't know everything, and I guess the typical thing with leadership is it's quite linear. You knew the most and therefore you sort of led, and then sort of people took guidance from someone, in the senior position who knew stuff. But in this world, people in a senior position don't know any more than anyone else about how AI might pan out or how might this. What are you like with, sort of saying, I don't know? I mean, you're in a really senior leadership position. How do you find it? Because it's a bit different. It's different for you as well as anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, I'm quite comfortable with that actually. In fact, I think as you get kind of more mature in your experience, you get more comfortable with that. And I saw that when I first became a non-exec director, which would have been probably 11, 12 years ago now. And, my first non-exec on quite a big FTSE board. And I remember meeting other very senior non-execs who are real seasoned people, and then realising that they didn't mind asking really kind of basic, simple questions, and they didn't mind saying in a public kind of board meeting, I don't really understand that. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. And
actually, it was quite eye-opening at that stage of my development, because you kind of always feel as a leader, you've got to know everything, or you certainly shouldn't be showing that you don't know. And I just think that just comes with maturity. But I think also, as you say, in this situation at the moment, there's nothing wrong with saying you don't know. But I also do think you have to think about, how do I help bring clarity to the teams that I lead?
Yeah.
And I think that's a different skill.
So how do you do that? How do you do that?
How do I do that?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I try to make myself kind of really informed. If I take the kind of current situation about AI, which I think that a lot of people in my situation may not know everything that there is to know about it, you have to kind of think, okay, what is the role that I might take in that? So one is the role that I take in helping my organisation embrace this big change that's coming. And then the other part of that is to think through, okay, how's this going to impact my own function? How will it impact the kind of teams that I lead? And how are we building a strategy around that? So I think you kind of just have to stand back and think about, well, I don't know everything. There's a lot of uncertainty, but how can I work through what I can find out and what is known, and then how can I prepare the organisation for that?
Yeah. So with AI, for example, so one of the things that we observe is that it seems to work well for adoption in teams, whether they be in HR or marketing or finance or whatever, where actually the person at the top of the organisation, so the chief people officer, chief financial officer, or whatever, goes first with AI. And I suppose one of our other observations is that's a bit different to technology of the past. So it used to be, technology had sort of come along, social media, for example, and how it might affect and add value to organisations. There was a bit of a tendency for someone who is perhaps a bit more mature in their years, typically in this leadership position, to sort of take a position, young people know about how all of this works because, they're bigger users of social media. So we'll sort of leave it up to them to sort of figure it out, and that'll be great. But that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case with AI. It seems to be a bit nascent unless someone at the top is getting very actively involved and saying, hey, I was playing around with Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever it is, and, look what I discovered. And we're talking with clients increasingly where, their big breakthrough in terms of getting an organisation to really go with it has come from maybe a chief executive sort of saying, I've been using AI and, have you seen what it can do with this? And you've seen what it do. And then in one organisation, we are social, so we interviewed Kate, who's the chief people officer there, where then the chief exec was going, so what I would like is all of you lot, the executive team, to go away and play with this and come back next week and we will share our examples. And it got real traction. What's your view on that? Do you think this is something that is a bit different and has to be led from the top?
I think it can be led from bottom up and top down, because I think that this is a situation where I think, all levels in the organisation are using ChatGPT, for example. So I think the big shift has come in with generative AI. AI has been around for quite a long time. Experian, we started this journey actually even within HR a couple of years ago. We got a leadership coach called Nadia, and Nadia, advises leaders on kind of performance. She can now set goals. She's trained on Experian strategy. So we've kind of spent a lot of time kind of really focusing on getting people to kind of use that.
And Nadia is not a real person.
No, Nadia is an AI coach.
AI
is a leadership coach.
Yeah.
But what we found is with the introduction of generative AI, that got everybody interested. And so we set up a Gen AI Academy in-house. Obviously, our business really needs to protect its data. We have to have quite strict protocols about kind of access to tools. And so we said that everybody, if they want to use any of the GPT tools internally, they have to undergo a level of training. So that was something that everybody has done. And we've still got more to do on that. And then we've done what everybody else has done, kind of integrate Copilot and those sorts of things. But we've got, a whole, AI is being integrated into our business as well as kind of as tools in other functions. I think the difference on Gen AI as well and other technology shifts is that it's not just the technologists that are using it, everybody is using it. And the way that we sort of think about it, if I think about HR, I think we've got a dual role. We've got a role to sort of think, okay, how do I help the organisation be more effective? How do we make sure that we have got the right training available for leaders, for all employees, etc. So, for example, one of the things that leaders are going to have to be more comfortable with is kind of how do they balance the kind of risk and compliance issues and, and I don't know the answer necessarily to that, but how do they get comfortable with that? And then I think the whole impact of AI on the HR function itself is going to be enormous. And I don't think we quite know the full extent of that yet. But I think we've got a role to kind of embrace it because it's happening. And I think one of my observations about this is that this is faster than I can think of any other change. And if you think about the last really big kind of digital innovation, it may well have been the kind of iPhone, for example, or utilising that in the way that we do it today. But when you look back, that was relatively slow and kind of adopting apps and adopting kind of the way that we kind of use them. I think generative AI is much, much faster. And I think that that's what we have to be prepared for. And recognising that it's going to, there's different impacts on the way that we work. But I don't know necessarily if we all know exactly what that's going to be yet. But I think everybody will recognise that there will be an impact.
So why do you think it's, because you were sort of saying, I think it's going to be quite profound, the impact on HR. Why do you think that?
Well, if you think about what HR spend their time doing sometimes, there's a lot of operational work, there's a lot of advisory work, and I think some of that can get augmented or even replaced by AI. So I think there's some elements of that. I think that it could make life easier in some ways in terms of automating workflows in a way, answering those kind of basic queries. Even if you've got great kind of shared service operations, it's still much easier for a line manager to speak to somebody that they know, everything. So I think there's some real, some benefits actually that I think some of the transactional work that still gets done will get taken away. I think the role that HR will have to have though is to think about, Gen AI will get it wrong. You can put something into Gen AI and then put the same thing into a co-pilot and you might get slightly different answers. So I think the skills that really good HR people have is around judgment, insight, and I think those things will become even more important. So I think there's a really great role that HR can play in making sure that you don't rely on technology so much that you don't think about the kind of human aspects of things. So those EQ skills, I think, will become even more important.
What's the most imaginative use of AI that you've seen?
I haven't got this internally, but what I've heard about is where you start thinking about skills that you need in the organisation, but instead of thinking about what people you might need and where you might get them, you're thinking about what chatbots you might need.
Just elaborate a little bit.
So I'm making this up, so I want someone who's got a PhD in kind of natural sciences. So rather than looking through who have I got that's got that sort of background, you might think, okay, is there a GPT somewhere that can provide that skill set for me? I mean, that's what I've heard about. I haven't seen it in use. But
interesting.
That could be quite imaginative. So basically it's like thinking about a chat GPT as a co-worker.
I was just going to ask if you think that's a positive. Do you think that's a positive thing for work?
Well, I think that it will happen. So it will be something to kind of really think. So the way I think about it is that it's just thinking about how you get all of the skills that you need. I don't think it's going to replace people. I think it will augment or assist. But I think that you have to think about the capabilities that are going to be available to you. And this is just one way of doing it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We were talking a little bit, Ralph, I don't know if you remember, I think it was you I was saying this to. We were having a conversation about how AI could maybe bridge some gaps from like a young talent perspective, so educational backgrounds and privilege around education. I think you mentioned even something like writing a good CV. Suddenly, people who may not have had a decent chance before now have these generative tools that they can deploy to help them, get better opportunities. So I think there's a lot of areas where this can help bridge gaps. What I'm wondering is, do you think it's creating gaps anywhere else, like in terms of true learning, being a true conversationalist? If we're to just look at young people coming into the workforce or young people growing into leadership roles, is there something that we might need to be aware of here or maybe plan for? Does this make sense as a question?
I think so.
I'm not sure that we know the answers to that yet. I think if you look at it logically, you'd see that you might need to have better communication skills rather than relying on technology. I think that the entry level of jobs we may need to think about. I think externally, there's quite a lot of noise in articles around, whether you need as many graduates or not. I just think the entry level, the bar just gets raised. You still will need entry level people, I think, but the bar of which the work that they may do might just need to change. And I imagine in a lot of companies, graduates are underutilised anyway. I'm sure, I don't know about you, but I remember when I first graduated thinking, why am I doing this work? I could easily do more.
Yeah.
And so that's my personal view, that you may be able to get more interesting work as your entry level, just because some of it will get automated.
Well, that's what I said. I think it shifts everything up. I mean, but that's always been my experience of technology. It's like, this is not the first time that people are worried about swathes of jobs being displaced by technology. I mean, it happened with the internet when it first came along and so on. I remember at Getty Images, people going, every picture researcher's job will be made redundant. Yeah. And it's like, the one where they literally do baseline work and go and pick and pack a picture for a client just because they know where the pictures are in a physical library. Yeah, they're gone, but they weren't very interesting for a picture research anyway. I mean, they were mainly graduates. I mean, that was not deploying their actual capacity very well at all. Got rid of that. Yeah, and they could then work with the client to imagine, what kind of imagery might be appropriate for this kind of advertising campaign much earlier on in the creative process of the client. The client got more value from that, and the individual got more value from using their brain in that way. The example that we were talking about was people going, but the thing about, ChatGPT or whatever it might be is that it's completely destroying a young person's ability to write properly. And I suppose my reaction was, well, I'm not sure if it is, but also it might be true on the one hand, but on the other hand, it levels things. So it used to be the case that some kid, maybe from a comprehensive and so on, it was kind of evident that their writing skills, just for whatever reason, might not be quite the same as someone who had gone to a grammar school or a private school. But that says nothing about their ability. And if ChatGPT can, write that CV and that cover letter in a way that absolutely is authentic and expresses that person's skill, but where it doesn't have spelling errors or whatever, great. All it's done is just eliminate something that was an unfair bias anyway. Yeah. So, my sense is it will only push things up.
I'm not worried about that so much. I think you're right. I mean, I've experienced lots of different disruption in industries where you kind of hear that, those jobs will go, or that job. I think what happens is just that new skills come in. And what I would say, though, is that if people embrace it and learn, and the one thing about this is that everybody can learn it. It's not so difficult. It's quite intuitive. And so I think if people embrace it, they will find that they've got an opportunity to learn new skills too. I mean, you never know kind of what the longer term impact of these things but it's the same with the internet, isn't it? You just think about how students before didn't have access to all of those resources, and then they did, but that hasn't really changed people's how they learn. They might just use different resources to help them, and I think ChatGPT is going to be exactly the same.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about, there's, whatever you might read in the press, it's a bit sensationalised potentially about, AI is going to eliminate swathes of jobs. And I was just asking you, in your experience, is it actually doing that? Is it eliminating sort of swathes of job? Because the employment rate is still very high in the UK and all around the world. It's not evident that that's happening. So just give us a bit more of your sense of that.
I'm not seeing that. I mean, I do see the headlines, and in some organisations that may well have been the case, but it's mostly the big tech players that are coming out and saying that, and maybe you don't know whether they'd over-recruited in the first place. I'm not seeing that. What I do see is that it might give organisations the ability to grow, maybe not increase headcount as much. But I'm not seeing that, huge, large-scale redundancies as a result of it. But what I will say is I do think that certain jobs will just be either assisted by it or augmented by it, and that I think is probably where the real change is.
So I said, what's the most creative use that you've seen of it? Have you seen AI in HR used very strategically to assist in a sort of a strategic endeavour? Because we see a lot of examples all over the place about how it is being deployed operationally. But at B, people are sort of sense of this is, there's a lot going on there. But how much is it being used in support of, for example, writing HR strategy, taking on and trying to figure out how you might address some of the sort of bigger concepts about, how do you create a learning organisation, for example, helping AI to sort of along with the task. What's your observations in that area?
If you put those sorts of questions into a ChatGPT, you would get a kind of a template out of kind of the kind of things to think about. But I don't think it would give you the kind of specific insights or examples that might be relevant for your organisation. So I do think that you can use it to kind of, the way I kind of think about it is that you can use it to help fast track your thinking, but your thinking and your judgment and your own insights will still be required.
Yeah, for sure.
I think sometimes the prompts are quite important, aren't they? Because I know sometimes when I've used it, I feel like it's kind of backing up a perspective that I'm providing it in my prompt. And sometimes it will give me information as fact, but if you ask it what the source of the information is, it can't actually find the stats it's giving you. And so I think sometimes it's just trying to help you present your arguments. You have to be really careful about what you want it to do. If you're just looking for facts, or if you're looking for, I need help putting together my argument for something. So it's kind of agreeing with you almost, even if you're not right. So I think sometimes the prompt is quite important as well.
It will always tell you that's a great question or a great point. And actually it may not be a great point. You might have been completely barking up the wrong tree. Yeah, there is. We're obviously great fans of using it, but at the same time, having used it a lot, you do realise that you have to be cautious on certain things. I was talking with not even a client, just a friend the other day who had. She's the chairperson of a sort of medium-sized health tech company, and she had asked it to sort of help build out a business case or something. And was saying had written a completely plausible business case, but luckily, because she was from the industry, she realised that it was completely wrong. But she was saying, had it been that she had less experience or less from the industry, it would have looked utterly plausible, this. And she could have gone on to sort of present this to the private equity board and so on, thinking she could rely on it. And in fact, it was almost an hallucination, as we know.
But I think as you said, Jess, it's as good as the prompts. It's as good as but that's why you still need human judgment. You still need to interpret and kind of evaluate. I think there are sophisticated models out there way beyond what I would be able to kind of, utilise. So I think, there's very different levels of it available. But I think for everyday use, as you've just described, it will get better and better. But I think we just have to learn to, as I said, look at the different uses, which I kind of think is about, either it assists you, it can augment what you might already think, or it can help power, the things that you've got. So I think that using data and analytics, the insights that you get, that might help you a little bit more, some of the strategic things. You possibly could kind of put a few things together and say, look, I've got this data, I've got this and this, give me some insight. So it just might help speed up the some of the topic areas that you might need to look at, as the way I see it.
Yeah.
But I think we're in the early stages of utilising and testing and experimenting, and that's what I am encouraging my teams to do, is just test and experiment with it.
What do you do with members of the team who are, for whatever reason, slower adopters? So certainly, again, with the work we're doing with sort of clients, and it's hardly unexpected situation is that you might find a chief people officer who is very keen that the whole function should embrace this and do what it can with it as quickly as it can, sensibly. And they talk with their leadership team in HR about it, and some people are extremely enthusiastic and embrace, and other people are going a bit slower. any experience of, how you help someone who, for whatever reason, is a slower adopter, a more reluctant adopter, whatever adopter, how you get them on board so that the whole function is kind of coming with you rather than one piece of it being left behind as others sort of power ahead?
I think there's a number of things. I think firstly, sort of actively trying to embrace a culture of kind of innovation and testing and learning is quite important. So I said to you that we'd set up our Gen AI Academy, and we really are encouraging everybody to at least do the kind of entry level training, but you can skill yourselves to different levels. And so I think that's kind of one thing that we've done. We've actually got tools in HR that we've kind of put in place. So I talked to you about the kind of leadership coach, but that's available to everybody to help goal setting. So we've been encouraging people to utilize that. We have, so we've launched quite a lot of tools that we've been sharing with everybody in HR. So one is around, like a job description tool to screen it so that it takes out any inherent bias. And so we've also tried to give really positive examples where we kind of utilize it. We're just about to launch a kind of talent marketplace, like something called My Career, which utilizes a lot of AI functionality to tailor and personalize experiences for people. And so we try to kind of really promote and highlight what we believe people will see very positively. And I think try and get people to embrace it that way.
Yeah.
And I think that when you see real life examples and how it can benefit your employees and it can, benefits everybody, I think that it just takes any kind of fear away from it.
Yeah.
So it's, as I said, it's about how do we improve our proposition by utilising latest technologies. And this is just one of them.
Yeah. Some of the conversation might be, that a business partner, so, aligned with a certain client area and so on, who used to, or does at the moment in an all-RIT model, call upon services from the centres of expertise and so on, that actually by leveraging AI, they may not need to do that to the same degree. So it used to be, they're talking with their business area about developing, leadership development programs, which is specific to them and so on. Used to sort of, stop for a moment, engage with the learning and development sort of centre of expertise, develop something together. Whereas now actually using an AI engine, they could probably work with the business to actually develop, a large part of that on their own without having to go to the centre of expertise. Do you think that might be something that...
I don't know. I think where I see the shift maybe, I still think you will need experts.
Yeah.
I generally do, for all the things that you said around really interpreting that, using judgment, applying it to your business. But where I think that the business partner role, I do think will shift to be even more strategic and focused on change and organisational effectiveness. Elements that good business partners should be doing today, but some may still be doing some of that advisory work, everything. But where I think the difference will be in that role is that they might use technology to get information quicker.
Yeah.
So those specialists I think will still be there. But if you think about how you can look at your kind of tech ecosystem in an organisation, you could just go in and just ask a question and get that information there. So you might not need to go to a person as quickly, but I still think the person will need to be there because the information's got to come from somewhere and someone's got to have oversight on your strategies and data and things.
Yeah.
But it is early days, so it is too difficult to know exactly how it will work. I've done some work with McKinsey on this to really think about the role of HR and the elements of it. But I think it's much more thinking, how do we augment the talent organisation? How do we get better insights? The kind of the McKinsey research kind of says that just those skills that you can't automate and that you can't utilise technology for will become even more important. And those are skills that a lot of HR people have.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so from what I'm gathering, and especially from how Experian is using AI so successfully, it sounds like you're saying, or let me ask you, do you think it's optional for a people leader to be thinking about this? Or is it impossible to be credible now as a people leader if you're not thinking about how artificial intelligence is affecting your industry or specifically your business, and how to, create a strategy on your embedded in your workforce planning around what the future is going to look like? Do you think it's an opt-in, opt-out scenario?
I'd be surprised if there wasn't people. I can't think of many industries where a people leader wouldn't be thinking about it, because even if you were thinking about it from a risk and compliance perspective, everybody will be thinking about it from a perspective of how might it impact the jobs that we need to create, what new skills will we need, how do we reskill our employees, what jobs may be impacted, how does that going to impact productivity? So I think that anybody who's in a kind of a leadership role will have to be thinking about those things. I don't know if people have the answers to those, but there's a navigation that needs to be done. But in the same way that other big technology changes have happened, I think the difference with this is that it's happening much quicker.
Yeah.
How do you find the time? I mean, because people are busy anyway, right? So it sounds like, really thinking about this is important, and experimenting with it aids learning, and that is important. How do you find the time to start to think about this enough?
I think that it's got to be so front and centre of your strategy, and that's what I've seen in the last sort of couple of years ago. Whereas, a couple of years ago, our HR strategy would have been thinking about how we can improve our business model or utilise better technology. I think the big shift that's happened now is how are we integrating AI into everything that we do. And as I said earlier, it's not just about HR function itself. It's also how do we help our leaders? Firstly, how do we help them learn? How do we help them think about the skills that they might need to have? And how do we start thinking about what impact there will be on the organisation? And I think there's a real dual role. And so I think you have to make the time, because if you don't, you could get really left behind on this.
Yeah.
So what really has happened is that it's just shifted the focus and shifted your priority. It's really interesting because we've been going through. A couple of years ago, we were about to sort of move our on-prem HR systems to the cloud, and then we decided not to go ahead for a particular reason, partly because while we were kind of getting ourselves in shape. And now 2 years on, we are going to about to sort of start that journey of moving our kind of core HR system. And now AI is a core part of that kind of strategy. Whereas when we started that a couple of years ago, it really wasn't a core part. Yeah. So it's the same sort of thing. It just has to be core. I mean, I'm not sure whether other industries are thinking about it the same, but I would imagine everybody is.
Yeah, and I think, well, firstly, this has been super insightful, and but it also feels very positive about using it in ways for improvement. And it seems like there's a lot of traction at Experian, and it's moving at real pace, and that's also very exciting. So thank you for being so transparent with us on that. One kind of final question to end things with. I don't know if you managed to give this much thought, but sort of skipping ahead to 2030, if we're there, what do you think one thing is that you'd like HR to be known for that maybe it isn't known well for at the moment?
I'm not sure about what it's not known for, but what I really hope is that HR kind of maintains its focus on people being at the centre of organisations. I think with all of this discussion on technology and particularly AI, I don't believe that people will ever get fully replaced by technology. I do think, as you said, Ralph, things will shift and, that there'll be a different emphasis. But what I really, really hope is that HR leaders, focus on those values that are important to people, like trust, integrity, being really people-centred, and they just don't lose that. and that remains at the forefront of their thinking, and that they continue to create environments where people can thrive and be their best. And I think if that is still front and centre, with all the change that's going on, with all the demands on HR leaders, that they continue to do that, then I think that'll be a great place to be.
Yeah, got to keep the balance, like you said at the very beginning. I love that. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. So really loved talking through all of this with you, and hopefully we'll continue the conversation soon. But yeah, thanks Jacky, and thanks Ralph for your time.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Good.